They were already dying when the final broadcast came through. The Cathari High Command had routed every ounce of energy into a final plea for reinforcements. No one answered, not because they couldn't, but because there was no one left to answer. The Oscary hive had swept through the outer colonies like a biological firestorm, devouring cities, warships, entire moons without slowing down. They never negotiated. They never responded. They only adapted. Commander Velith of the Cathari stood in the dim glow of the strategic holosphere, watching the red tendrils of hive occupation reach into the last 5 systems still under Alliance control. The projections showed less than 2 weeks of resistance. That was optimistic. 16 civilizations had joined the Galactic Alliance, and now only 3 had functioning fleets. None of them had won a major engagement in over a year. The Oscary didn't merely kill, they dismantled. They disassembled sentient species like puzzles, deciphering physiology and neural architecture for repurposing. They learned from every failure. Every lost drone simply taught them how not to lose the next time. The original defense doctrine, built on technological superiority and diplomacy, had collapsed. The hive did not recognize superiority. It only consumed it. Velith had once argued against total war. Now, she was fighting a delaying action just to buy time for planetary evacuations that rarely succeeded. The hive targeted retreat routes with terrifying precision. They had no scouts, no sensors, yet they always knew where to strike. And their numbers were endless. They did not retreat. They did not sleep. They did not fear death. The hive's leading edge had cracked the last offensive perimeter at Vasker Prime. What was supposed to be a fortified fallback world turned into a mass grave in 6 days. Over 1 million soldiers. Gone. Velith's cousin had died on the 3rd day, sending a final message that ended with the words, "They're inside our minds. They know what we'll do before we do." It wasn't metaphor. Alliance strategists had confirmed that hive drones shared a limited form of neurological mimicry. Once exposed to species, they absorbed more than DNA. They absorbed instinct, memory, behavior. They weren't just winning the war. They were becoming their enemies. There were discussions, private, unrecorded, about surrender. Not formal surrender, but the quiet kind. The kind that happened when people stopped answering orders, when ships stopped fueling, when ground troops disappeared into civilian masses, and hoped the hive wouldn't find them. There were no victory plans left, only damage mitigation. And then came the transmission. It wasn't even official. It came from a scientific outpost near the Galactic Rim, Zeta 9, a Corlani research hub abandoned for decades due to instability in the surrounding systems. The outpost's last project had been the study of Deathworld species, dangerous fauna, unstable climates, worlds where life clawed upward from toxic soil and never stopped fighting. One of those worlds was Earth. Velith barely remembered the name. Humanity had been flagged by the Council nearly 70 cycles ago. Records showed Earth was placed under Level 5 containment protocols. No contact, no integration, no exceptions. The reason? Behavioral volatility, unpredictable evolutionary pathways. A planetary culture built around sustained, industrialized violence. In short, they were terrifying. The Alliance had considered the humans too dangerous to bring into the fold, even under monitoring. There were files about them: nuclear weapons before unification, biochemical agents tested on their own kind, mass global conflicts over ideology and resource control. Their last known status was isolated. And according to the archives, they'd agreed to it. Now, someone had reached out to them. The transmission from Zeta 9 was short. 8 words, encrypted in 5 redundant protocols. They are our only chance. I've called them. No name, no sign-off, just silence afterward. Within 2 cycles of the message, Zeta 9 went dark. Completely. Power, heat, atmosphere, all offline. Alliance scouts found the station husked and hollow. Every data node destroyed with surgical precision. No survivors. The Council ordered a blackout on the message, not because they thought it was a threat, but because they feared it might be true. Calling the humans was not just desperate. It was reckless. But desperate was all they had left. 5 standard days later, something entered orbit over Reshtala. Not a fleet, not a broadcast, not even a challenge. Just 3 vessels. Matte black, angular, silent, no emissions, no registry, no insignia. They drifted into high orbit over the last functioning Alliance command world and remained stationary. Defense satellites tried to scan them. Nothing. Sensor ghosts. Each one the size of a dreadnought, but with no visible propulsion, no life readings. Then the Hive appeared. It wasn't a skirmish. It was a slaughter. Hive warcraft entered the system in waves. Standard behavior. No warning, no posturing. Just immediate attack. 10 minutes later, the 3 unidentified ships moved. Not through space. Through the Hive. All communication cut out during the engagement. Satellite logs later recovered partial data. What they showed was classified immediately. The human vessels didn't fire traditional energy weapons. They didn't deploy fighters. They simply vanished and reappeared among Hive formations with impossible acceleration, tearing through the enemy like surgical blades. One vessel emitted a single gravitational pulse that collapsed 3 Hive carriers into themselves. Another deployed a swarm of drones, black spheres that exploded into clouds of what appeared to be self-replicating microblades. Every Hive ship that encountered them disintegrated into powder. Reshtala's ground crew stood in silent awe as the largest Hive fleet in 6 months was annihilated in 17 minutes. Not a single shot fired in defense of the planet. Not one. Then came the message. It wasn't routed through the standard comm grid. It hijacked every frequency, every screen, every neural uplink. A single sentence, spoken in dozens of species dialects simultaneously. You called. We answered. Stand aside. No name. No symbol. Just that. The message ended. The black ships remained for another day, then vanished into warp corridors the Alliance couldn't trace or follow. Reports of new engagements trickled in from dying outposts. Hive fleets destroyed in hours. Precision strikes. Planetary sieges lifted with no survivors left on either side. Ground footage recovered showed armored figures, 2 meters tall, encased in kinetic dispersal suits, moving with terrifying precision. Some carried weapons that vaporized organic matter. Others simply used their bare hands. The soldiers did not speak. They did not acknowledge the locals. They moved like wraiths, efficient and emotionless. They didn't just kill the Hive. They made sure nothing was left to evolve from what remained. Alliance analysts began to panic. They didn't understand the tactics. There were no visible command structures. No logistics, no supply lines. Just destruction. Brutal. Controlled. The council convened again. Some argued to halt communication. Others suggested formal integration. One commander, an Urshel tactician who had survived 3 Hive fronts, stood and said, "The turning point was not a battle. It was a silence. Hive fleets stopped appearing along the inner corridor routes. Dozens of sectors once overwhelmed by constant attacks went quiet. Alliance intelligence scrambled to understand the change. There were no transmission intercepts, no signals, nothing from human channels or the Hive. The entire front froze. Then came reports, isolated, unverified. Whole Hive breeding worlds had gone dark. Astrobiological sensors picked up atmospheric shifts consistent with high-velocity particle bombardment and sterilization events. Entire planetary biomes had collapsed. Surface scans indicated deep crustal fissures, extreme temperature spikes, and complete organic annihilation. There was no trace of the Hive. The first official contact with the humans came not through diplomacy, but during a reclamation attempt. An Alliance fleet led by Admiral Korvek was dispatched to assess the viability of retaking Droken 7, a planet lost to the Hive 2 years earlier. The fleet arrived to find the planet strangely intact, no visible Hive biomass, no atmospheric corruption, no defensive posture. Then they detected movement. Human ground teams were already present. Their ships were nowhere in orbit, but the terrain showed signs of controlled orbital insertion. What remained of the Hive population had been gathered into pits, deep circular craters, each filled with what used to be thousands of drones. There were no visible weapons used. The bodies were pulverized, as though compressed by immense force. Korvac attempted to initiate contact. He sent standard Alliance hails, frequency sweeps, visual markers. No response. The humans ignored them, continuing whatever operation they were conducted with mechanical precision. One of the fleet's reconnaissance drones descended too close. It vanished from sensors. No warning, no debris. Korvac issued a recall order. The message was clear without words. The planet was under human control. Trespassing was not advisable. Alliance leadership convened to reassess strategy. The enemy they had feared was now their only line of defense. But the humans were not allies in any conventional sense. They didn't coordinate. They didn't debrief. They didn't share intelligence. They hunted. The War Council reviewed over 80 recorded encounters. In every instance, the humans operated with extreme autonomy. They struck at hive logistics with surgical precision, exploiting weaknesses the Alliance hadn't even recognized. Communications between distant human units appeared non-existent, yet their coordination was flawless. They arrived simultaneously across sectors with impossible synchronization. Theories emerged. Some believed the humans had developed subquantum communication. Others suspected precognition. A few feared something worse, that the humans no longer required communication at all, operating as a kind of emergent, decentralized combat intelligence. More troubling than their tactics was their psychology. In every recorded operation, humans showed no signs of fatigue, hesitation, or moral limitation. They executed hive drones, even those incapacitated, without pause. They demolished entire ecosystems that showed signs of hive contamination. They scorched cities, forests, oceans. There was no distinction between battlefield and target. And yet, they were not indiscriminate. Civilian populations were left untouched. In sectors where hive and Alliance colonies had overlapped, the humans extracted non-combatants with quiet efficiency before annihilating the infestation. No announcements. No gratitude requested. Alliance command began tracking their movement. Wherever the humans went, hive signals dropped. Not just physically, digitally. Hive encryption vanished. Their neural frequencies, once monitored by advanced xenocyte protocols, ceased entirely. It was as though the humans weren't just killing them. They were erasing them. The psychological shift across the galaxy was palpable. For the first time in years, colonies began to stabilize. Recruitment in the shattered Alliance military surged. Refugees returned to scorched homelands. The word hope re-entered official documents. But alongside it came fear. The humans were not celebrated. They were not paraded as saviors. They were whispered about, deathless soldiers who fought like machines but bled like gods. They used weapons no one could replicate, armor no one could scan. Their ships defied thermodynamic limits. Their war doctrine, if it could be called that, was built on absolute escalation. If hive forces struck with claws, the humans answered with extinction events. Diplomatic outreach continued. Dozens of entreaties sent across wide-spectrum bands. No response. The humans remained uncontactable, untouchable. Then something changed. At Varnak's reach, an old Alliance outpost long thought lost, a human forward team made contact. Not with military command, but with civilians. They arrived unannounced, cleared the hive in a matter of hours, then left behind crates marked with symbol, a human hand, palm out, painted in red. Inside the crates were medical supplies, atmospheric processors, and energy generators. Everything the colony needed to rebuild. The message was simple. You are not forgotten. Across other liberated worlds, similar events occurred. Human teams dropped survival kits, stabilized crumbling infrastructures, and moved on. They never stayed. They never spoke. They simply restored function and disappeared. Alliance Command began to realize the truth. The humans weren't ignoring them out of hostility. They were too busy. Each Deathworlder combat unit operated on a scale beyond comprehension. They didn't maintain front lines because for them, there were no fronts, only targets. They didn't track war progress because they were the progress. Wherever they landed, the hive died, permanently. The hive began adapting, as it always had. It started slowly. New hive bioforms emerged. heavily armored, faster, exhibiting traits not previously seen. Analysts identified elements of human neural architecture replicated in drone clusters. Attempts to mimic human movement, decision speed, even tactical improvisation. But it didn't help. The humans had evolved past that already. They didn't rely on the same patterns. Each soldier was an individual theater of war. They employed different weapons, different killing methods, even different philosophies of execution. Some fought with overwhelming firepower. Others used stealth and subterfuge. A few engaged the hive unarmed, relying on biomechanical augmentation that defied biology. The hive couldn't learn fast enough. Then came the Red Harvest. It began in the Krallen Expanse, a sector thought lost. Alliance surveillance picked up strange signals, shortwave pulses at harmonic intervals. When scouts were dispatched, they found every hive structure disassembled, every biomass cluster neutralized. In place of the hive nest stood monoliths, towers of obsidian black metal etched with fractal code. No one knew what they did. No one dared approach. The hive died slowly, not for lack of resistance, but because death was no longer just a possibility. It was the outcome, their evolution once their strength became irrelevant. Every adaptation they attempted had already been predicted, countered, and neutralized by human strike logic. Mutation patterns that once bewildered entire Alliance research divisions were now cataloged, dissected, and overwritten in real time by autonomous human warfare AIs. Hive queens attempted to shift strategies, moving underground, deep into planetary cores, hiding in geothermal fissures where even orbital strikes struggled to reach. It didn't matter. Humans followed. They brought tunneling war forms, weapons built not for siege but for planetary disassembly. They carved through rock and metal, flooding subterranean nests with corrosive atmospheres synthesized to destroy only hive biology. No screams, no survivors. The silence that followed was absolute. Across what was once hive-controlled space, the pattern repeated. Each new world was a repetition of failure for the hive. Colonies fell not in hours, but in minutes. Human warships didn't blockade. They eradicated. Their presence in orbit wasn't a threat. It was a death sentence. Alliance observers recorded what they could, but even their best reconnaissance equipment struggled to keep pace. Human vessels moved without traditional propulsion signatures. Their gravitational signatures fluctuated in ways that implied spatial distortion, not acceleration. Whole fleets blinked in and out of deep space, as though space itself had grown thin to them. No one knew how their FDL systems functioned. No one dared ask. The hive, one spanning thousands of systems, was reduced to fragments. It was not a war. It had become an extinction clock, ticking down in real time. Hive transmissions grew erratic, desperate. Drones retreated from the front, abandoning entire sectors, digging into systems far removed from known star maps. The logic was simple. If they could not win, perhaps they could hide, wait, survive in silence until the fire passed. But the fire didn't pass. Humans hunted them beyond the edge of known space. They established forward positions in dead systems, using the lifeless remnants of ancient stars as launch points for deeper excursions. The Alliance watched in stunned silence as the final Hive Queens vanished from the universe, not in climactic final battles, but with nothing more than a status report. Hive node neutralized, zone sterilized, sector secure, and then it ended. No fanfare, no announcement. The last known Hive signal blinked out from a deep field relay near the galactic abyss. After that, nothing. The Alliance, long broken, stood on the precipice of recovery. Its fleets, scattered and underpowered, began reclaiming the systems left behind. Where high biomass had once choked planets, there were only black obelisks. Where war had scorched the skies, peace returned, but not as it had been before. Something fundamental had changed. Humanity did not claim the worlds they liberated. They left no banners, no governors, no empires. They departed just as they had arrived, without invitation, without warning. Their fleets vanished, their soldiers dispersed. Entire battle groups disappeared from sensors, presumed withdrawn to their unknown home systems. No coordinates were ever confirmed. No star matched their origin points. And yet their presence remained. In every system they touched, Infrastructure functioned with impossible precision. Terraforming systems kept colonies in perfect balance. Atmospheric regulators adjusted to local climates before any biological shift could cause harm. Medical bays operated without personnel. Supplies replenished without input. No resource was overharvested. No machine malfunctioned. The systems ran as if guided by invisible hands. The Alliance began rebuilding, but this time, carefully, respectfully. The arrogance that once fueled interspecies politics had dissolved. Where once the High Council debated the philosophical nature of galactic dominance, they now discussed resource allocation, refugee resettlement, and ecological balance. They feared the alternative. It became an unspoken rule: do not exploit, do not provoke, do not dominate. If the humans returned, it would not be for negotiation. New governments formed with humility embedded in their structures. War doctrines were rewritten not to enhance power, but to prevent unnecessary aggression. Military training shifted from conquest to defense. The very language of diplomacy changed. Threat assessments now included a quiet variable. Would this action warrant human attention? A single story circulated in hushed tones across hundreds of star systems. A minor power, a technologically stagnant warlord republic, had attempted to conquer a refugee world in the Outer Rim. They arrived with a fleet of 70 ships, broadcast a formal demand for submission, and deployed ground forces to seize the population centers. 12 minutes later, every warship vanished from long-range scans. Not destroyed, gone. The warlord's capital world suffered a planet-wide systems blackout that lasted 11 days. When power returned, their central defense grid was gone. All military files had been deleted. Their orbital stations hovered derelict. Their ground forces had vanished. No dead, no wreckage, just empty uniforms stacked in neat piles. No one claimed responsibility, but every witness, every analyst, and every government knew exactly who had done it. The lesson was permanent. Humanity had become the stabilizing force of the galaxy, not through domination, but through inevitability. They were not rulers. They were reminders. The Alliance, now fully reconstituted under a new interspecies charter, formalized what became known as the Deathworld Accord. It was not a treaty with humans. No human signed it. No human acknowledged it. It was a pact between every other civilization, an agreement to maintain balance, peace, and ethical governance, to prevent any rise of a threat that might echo the hive, to ensure that no more flames would need to be lit. But still, the galaxy wondered, where had the humans gone? Sensors reported no concentrated human presence. Their fleets had scattered. Their outposts were either dismantled or sealed. Attempts to follow their trajectories ended in failure. Some believed they had returned to their homeworld, wherever it was. Others suggested they had entered a form of deep isolation, watching from a distance. One prevailing theory emerged, that the humans were never centralized, that their war had not been commanded from a capital or organized from a throne. Instead, each unit, each soldier, had acted autonomously, unified not by orders but by purpose. A species guided not by command structures, but by shared intent. And what was that intent? Some said vengeance, others justice. But among those who had studied their patterns the closest, who had watched them fight, rebuild, and leave without a word, the answer was simpler: balance. The galaxy had tipped into chaos. Humanity had arrived to restore equilibrium, not by diplomacy, but by force. Their strength was not in numbers or technology, but in resolve, in the certainty that if something threatened life itself, they would answer. One final message surfaced 2 years after the last hive signal faded. It was embedded in a pulse code transmission recovered from a drifting satellite near the dead system of Veltarash.